religion and their relations. First, about culture. We usually understand culture both at the level of human practice and at the level of results of that practice. On the one hand, what we call culture the word culture is a way of describing human practice in general. Everything which we are doing all the times in any possible way is always a way of contributing to culture. We understand culture maybe in the line of the Latin colere, and it means the first meaning of the word is for agriculture. We are cultivating our fields, but then we understand culture in this very, very general way. All kind of human practice which is involved in language, in symbols. It's always elaborating culture. That's the first level of the meaning. But also we are sensitive to the results of such practice. Because we are always engaged in cultural activity, we have cultural results. So we have a lot of things, of cultural things in our world, and these cultural things are kind of tools for us. They allow us to live. It's how do we live every day of our life? We live every day of our life by using all these cultural things which stand around us in our world. So we have these two meanings of culture, culture as practice and culture as results, which I call in the paper sedimentation, because cultural things, they remain. They still stand in our world, even if they come from far centuries. So we have, culture is a sedimentation. We have all layers of time which belong all to our culture, our cultural world. And we can see religion as part of culture in both ways. First, we may say that there is a religious practice which is part of human practice. So what we are working at as human people, part of it is building religions, is keeping religions, is enriching religions, or inventing religions. There are a lot of things related to religion which motivate cultural practice. But also, religion exists in our world as a set of results. We have a set of religious things all around us. Maybe the most striking example is churches. We have in Europe, in every city of Europe, you may visit a lot of churches which are cultural things, and that type of cultural things which are religious things. But we have a lot of other religious things, be it texts or customs, any kind of things of that kind. So religious things are also partners for individual life. Well, it doesn't work very well. Why? So I think I will forget about technology. For some reason I don't understand. So still in this first part where I try to introduce the content of my talk. Second set of remarks, I should also say that usually both religion and culture, they have a strong connection with some peoples of our nations of the world. Because the subject which creates culture, the subject who creates cultural things, is usually not so much the individual subjects, but generally it's a collective subject. And so very often this collective subject is a nation or a people. So very often cultural results, especially of the type of religions, they bear some historical connection with some nation or people. So we know, for example, that Catholic Christianity is privileged in Italy, even if it's not mandatory. And we know that Shiite Islam is central for contemporary Iran. Two easy examples. So there is a connection with nations or people. But this does not mean that we should consider history of culture and history of religion as depending on national history or history of people. National history or history of people doesn't determine entirely history of culture and history of religion. And for I can assert that would it be only for a very simple reason, is that nations and people are themselves cultural products. So the scope of history of culture is wider than the scope of history of nations or of people. On the contrary, history of nations and history of people is part of the scope of history of culture in general. With everything I just outlined, which I consider is the usual picture, it's our usual, let us say, scientific picture about concerning religion and culture, I think we have to say that the Jewish case is quite non-standard, and the Jewish case is usually non-standard. So there is something standard in its being non-standard. And we may express that at two levels. First, Jewish experience is very much marked by the two millenaries situation of constrained dispersion. You know that we make a difference between just I don't know, diaspora, I think you know the word, it's the Greek word, and galut, which is the Hebrew word. And while diaspora means the dispersion of Jewish people as such, without any further content, galut means the dispersion as imposed by history, as resulting from the fact that Roman destroyed the Second Temple and quite explicitly and consciously didn't want the Jewish system to work any longer. So that was the origin of this dispersion, which is for that reason called galut. And so due to this very long experience, Jewish experience intersected several nations and several dimensions of culture. So we have results, cultural results, which are each time a kind of crossing, either of Jewish experience with a part of culture, an area of culture, or an intersection of Jewish experience with a specific nation. And very often with both at the same time. So I give two examples. I may quote Hispanic Jewish medieval philosophy, which is at the same time intersection of Jewish experience with philosophy as an area of culture, and an intersection of Jewish experience with Hispanic people. Or I could also quote the Jewish Eastern Europe political contribution of the Bund, which is at the same time an intersection of Jewish experience with nations of the area and with the cultural area of politics. So we have these intersections. So it's the first way of the relation of Jewish experience with nations of people and culture of not being standard. Jewish experience crosses both nations and people on the one hand, parts of regions of culture on the other hand. Also, there is a second sense in which the Jewish experience is non-standard with respect to these issues of nations and peoples. It's the fact which is, I think, very well known that Jewish tradition is describable as the convergence or superimposition of a particular people, which is the Jewish people, and something which is commonly regarded as a religion. Although in this talk I will argue that it is an incorrect way of looking at Judaism or Jewish tradition. I don't think that it is mainly a religion, even if it can work it can work as a religion in many cases for a lot of historical reasons. So we have this second reason why the relation of Jewish tradition with nations and people is in some sense not external, which doesn't fit with the common picture of all these notions. So I will try to give you some insights about the content of my most recent book, and so I'm only in a promotional tour here. And so this book is called The Jewish Fact, and I would like to recommend it because it's the most understandable thing I ever wrote. So it's already a great quality, I think. I think that I'm going to describe the Jewish fact, but I think all these considerations bring also new insights about the interplay between the two general categories of religion and culture. I'm not going to develop very much these consequences, but I think it legitimates my talk here in that conference. So I begin with my second part, which is the Jewish fact. This was the first part towards my topic. So now I begin with my second part, which is the Jewish fact. And first, some explanations about my use of the word fact. So you know that there are two very famous books which are called The Jewish Question. There is one of Marx and another of Jean-Paul Sartre, my country fellow. I don't like this expression, the Jewish question, because I think we cannot avoid this expression, the Jewish question, to mean the question which the very existence of Jewish experience poses to other people. They feel threatened. They feel there is a problem with the very fact that this Jewish experience is going on. And when they speak about the Jewish question, that's the question they have in mind. And I want to part with this understanding of a Jewish question. I know that for some people, Jewish question doesn't mean that, but I think we cannot avoid the linguistic expression. History being what it is, we cannot avoid the linguistic expression to have this content, to let it sound. So I prefer to part from the expression, the Jewish question, and I prefer the Jewish fact. How do I understand here fact? I understand in fact in the line of the Latin factum. So fact simply means what has been accomplished. What I name the Jewish fact is simply the fact that in human history, a certain meaning has been delivered, a certain experience has gone through history along centuries. Jewish experience has happened, and we know it, we know of it, we have heard of it, and we cannot make that it has not happened. And so Jewish facts arrive through history until us, and which is more, not only it arrives until us, but it may arrive through us, meaning that it's going to go farther, maybe with our help. Not always, but maybe. So when I speak about the Jewish fact, I'm referring both to this very old accomplishment through centuries, and also I'm meaning of the opening of a future. The Jewish fact is not closed, it's not finished. It keeps on going. It has new avenues to go through. So that's the way I understand Jewish facts. And now there is the point which comes is that Jewish experience, or the Jewish fact, has many facets, has many guises, has many versions in history and in geography. And that diversity is very often underlined. And some people are tempted to say that there are so many versions and guises of Jewish tradition that in a way we should stop speaking about the Jewish tradition. We should consider the possibility that there is nothing common to all these versions and facets. I don't believe that. I think that everything which has happened as Jewish experience always keep a reference to a kind of core, and that explains my title, my general title, The Jewish Core. And the core of Jewish tradition is what I call study/observance. It's the couple of Jewish study to Jewish experience goes with studying a certain set of texts. These are the source texts of tradition. And a great part of Jewish life is studying these texts. And studying these texts is even a command. You have to study these texts. And at the same time, you have observance, which means that it is about doing what is prescribed. There are negative and positive commands, which are the negative and positive commands of Judaism. That's how people say it usually. And Jewish life means obeying these commands, doing what is asked and not doing what is forbidden. And study and observance, they go together. They are a couple. You cannot understand anyone without the other. And so this builds the core of Jewish experience or of Jewish tradition. It's this intimate couple of study and observance. And this means that the center of Jewish experience is Jewish law. And if you understand that correctly, this helps you to stop seeing Judaism or Jewish tradition as a religion, because a religion is understood as a relation to a supernatural being, which has a classical name. And this relation is usually thought to be personal, and we have a generic name for that relation, which is faith. And so religion, in our understanding, and it's normal because we are living in Christian Europe, and so we have this understanding of religion. So religion is faith connected with supernatural God. And Christianity took the habit of understanding Judaism and Jewish tradition through this prism. So you find it, for example, very clearly in Pascal, in the French philosopher Pascal. In his thoughts, there are a lot of passages about Judaism, and he understands Judaism as the wrong religion. And that's always how he describes it. And so for Christianity in general, not only for Pascal, first, Judaism is a religion, and the content of this religion, you find it in the Old Testament. So for a Christian, usually, he thinks he knows Judaism, because it's simply the wrong religion that you find in the Old Testament, and now we have a better religion, which we obtain by adding the New Testament. And so we know what Judaism is. It's a faith, like us, like our faith. It's a faith directed to the same God, and we find the content of this faith in the Old Testament. But Judaism is not, as I said, mainly, basically, fundamentally a religion. It's a law for a people. It's Jewish law, and you don't find Jewish law in the Old Testament. You find Jewish law in the Talmud. In the Old Testament, you only find a very short outline of Jewish law, and even this outline, if you are following Jewish law, you don't have to take what is written in the Old Testament for granted, because very often the rabbis in the Talmud have turned the meaning of this small part of the law, which is in the Old Testament. They have turned the meaning, and you have to understand the law like the rabbis have said in the Talmud, and not like it is written in the Old Testament. So that's part of what my book explains. So you are beginning to understand the picture. The Jewish project is, I prefer not to characterize it as a religious project, because it is not about theology, it is not about the promise of immortality, it's about producing a world of radical justice. The aim of the Talmud, the aim of observance, of doing the commands of Jewish law, is to create, at the level of the laboratory of a specific people, the aim is to create a collectivity of people sensitive to the stakes of ethics. And the idea is, for having a collective of human beings sensitive to the stakes of ethics, you need these people to be awakened. You need them not to be sleeping and going on simply following their habits. They have to be awakened to the other person. And the practice of the commands is supposed to train a collective to this awakeness and to this openness to the ethical demand of the other person. And also, Jewish law tries to design this law of radical justice. So that's the great idea of the project. And in this sense, it is about transcendence, but you have to distinguish transcendence from theology. Transcendence is simply the idea that there are stakes in our shared human life which we cannot reduce to any theoretical content. There are stakes which bear on us, which make sense for us, but we cannot put them in any explicit thematizing formula. So this is transcendence. And from this point of view, theology is the betrayal of transcendence, because when you are doing theology, you are using a concept of God, which you consider as being clear, and you claim that you have an explanation of the whole set of the world, of life, of the universe, through this concept of God. So transcendence is lost if you enter theology in this sense. So this is what I would take as the best description of this project of radical justice, which goes through formulation of Jewish law and observance of Jewish law. And, you know, in Talmud, there are two layers. You have first the layer of the Mishnah, where you find a first synthesis of the Jewish law with simply explicit mention of everything which has to be done. And you have a second level, which is Gemara, where you have a discussions of all these laws. And this discussion at the same time gives all the details. So it makes it possible to observe the law, because you find all the details of what has to be done in various situations in the discussion of the Gemara. But also the discussion of the Gemara discloses the meaning of the laws, in the sense that for each law brings with it a way of picturing human world. So when you study Gemara, you come to internalize, so to say, the picture of human relations, which was the picture of the rabbis. And the idea of observance is not simply that Jewish people should observe the commands. They should do what is asked to do and not to do what is forbidden. They also should understand the world as the Gemara does. So it's the project of, that's why observance is connected with study, because to be a good observer of the law, you don't have to simply do correctly the law, you have also to enter this understanding of human relations, which is given with the law, and which is, and it's part of the radical justice project, that you create a humanity which shares that sophisticated understanding of human relations. So you see that Jewish project is strangely universal because it goes through the laboratory of a specific people. And the Jewish law is a kind of people experiment. You try to realize this radical justice law at the level of a specific people. But it is still meant as universal because all the rabbis always said and thought that the content of Jewish law should have a meaning for the whole humanity. Even if the whole humanity, for now, is not following this law, the way this law is articulated, the way it is thought, is of great interest for every human being. So it's the idea of a particularism, but with universal radiance. That's the idea of Jewish law. And here you have the concept of election, which is very important because election means that non-Jewish people are dispensed with Jewish law, and it's very important. Election is the protection of the Gentiles. If you are not Jew, if you are not Jewish, you don't have to follow Jewish law. So it's a very positive point if you think of what a burden Jewish law is. So that's the first thing I wanted to underline. But also, it's very important to understand that this particularism is not mandatory for humankind in general. So, as I often say to make the point as clear as possible, it is not Jewish to think that someone has to be Jewish. From the Jewish perspective, you may reach what is at stake for humankind, and according to Jewish view, what is at stake for humankind is ethics. To be a great human person, you have to satisfy during your life the stakes of ethics, to do everything you can to be a good person, let us say it that way. And you can do that without Jewish law. So Jewish law, it's just the way of a local experiment, which is the experiment of Jewish people. And it is very clear, the famous saying is that the just person of the nations is equal to the great priest. So you don't have to be Jewish. It's very important. And you know, there is a story, which is a French story, which is Aimé Pallière, who was a Catholic Christian and who is extremely friend with Benamozeg, which was at the end of 19th century, which was a great Jewish rabbi and intellectual, and he wrote very interesting books. And his friend Pallière was so much seduced by Judaism, which he discovered through Benamozeg, that he wanted to become a Jew. And Benamozeg told him, "But why? You don't need to." So you see, I think it's an important point. And so last point, I insist again about the relation between study and observance. I'm not going to speak too much about. There are so many things to say, and so. Read my book if you tolerate French. So two last words about the connection between study and observance. I already told you the two relations. First, you have to study to know what has to be done. So you need study for observance, because if you don't study, you are not going to simply know what the commons ask you to do. And the second point is that it is commanded to study, and it is commanded not only to observe, but to reach the conceptual level of study while you observe. So it's the second level of this relation. But there is a level, a level which doesn't happen between. There is a connection which anyone, I think, from the outside of Jewish world would anticipate, and there is a connection that you don't have. When you study Gemara, Mishnah, Talmud, you don't find in your study the reason why you are doing such and such comments. So study doesn't stand in the role of theory legitimating practice. And we have this picture of, for us, there is a theoretical moment, a theoretical phase, but this theoretical phase, it's the moment where we wonder, what are we going to do? So maybe we are doing 2 years of theory before acting, but at the end of the 2 years, we are going to do something which is deduced from this big theoretical phase we went through. So in the couple study observance, study doesn't play this role. What you find in studying is not a reason for doing the comments. It's what you discover when you study, it's the human world that people who observe have in mind. You discover a description of how to look at the world accompanying doing the comments. So it's not a reason for doing such and such comment. It's simply an understanding of all the deep meaning of the world which observance has in mind. So at the end of the game, when you have studied a lot of laws and when you understand how the rabbis were seeing the human world, maybe you think they have such a rich and generous and kind vision of humans and relations between humans that I'm tempted to follow their way. So you are going to be convinced, maybe, but at that global level, but you don't find in the particular discussions of the Gemara concerning such and such law, you don't find the rationale for obeying this law. So this was a point I thought it was important to do. Now I come to the last part of the talk, at least if I have some time, because maybe I already spoke too much.
I think you still have like 5 minutes.
So I'm going to try to do that quickly. So the last part is what I call a vision of culture. So from what I said until now, you understand that the couple of study and observance is the core of Jewish culture. But at the same time, Jewish law has something to say about every district of human life or experience. Jewish law says something about sexuality, about food, about economy. You find in Gemara discussions about how an entrepreneur should treat his worker. So you have really economic considerations. You have considerations about what we call in French penal right. So when someone damages someone else, how should it be repaired? You find all that in Talmud. So and more of this, you can say that in the richness of the discussion of Jewish law, you find a way of, you find a kind of pattern of intellectual behavior. And in a way, maybe it may inspire a specific way of using language, a specific way of entering the work of science, maybe a specific way of facing the adventures of art. So there is a general significance of Jewish law for every area of culture. Still, as I already told you, according to the Chachamim, who are the sages, the rabbis of the Talmud, according to the Chachamim, Jewish culture should be centered on ethics. If we understand that ethics includes social justice, so this ethics is also part of what we call politics, but I think politics is probably not the best name for that. But you cannot do ethics only at the individual way, according to this perspective. And but that doesn't mean that other dimensions of culture should not be cultivated. So there is a stress on ethics and social justice, but very clearly, if you read even the Talmud, you understand that the other areas of culture are not closed or forbidden. In my book, I have tried to highlight 3 words which for me express what I call the resonance of the Jewish fact. What I call the resonance of Jewish fact is what emanates from the Jewish fact and, according to me, makes sense for every human being. So it's an attempt as formulating what could be the universal seduction of a Jewish tradition. So these three words, and it will be my conclusion, so these three words are concrete, and I mean concrete, the adjective, human, and memory. So concrete, the idea is that the small concrete things of our lives cannot be forgotten. If we are entering considerations which seem to bypass these small concrete things of our lives, it's bullshit. We should reject any kind of pretentious, arrogant general conception which is disrespectful with these small concrete things. But this should not mean entire intellectualism, and that's the difficult point, because a lot of people are able to agree with the first part of what I said, but they agree by defining themselves as entire intellectual. And what Jewish tradition brings is keeping together, favoring intellectualism, recognizing that trying to think well, correctly, profoundly is it's important, it's great, it's a value. And at the same time, we should not be disrespectful with the concrete small things. So that's the first word, concrete. The second word is human. So I'm often tempted to describe a Jewish perspective as the project of living at the human level, which means that we are not going to sacrifice the human level to anything externally and allegedly superior. We are living at the human level, and it's already immense, it's already infinite, and we have to explore and assume that human level, which means also, according to me, following the typical path of infinitization at the human level. And the two great paths of infinitization at the human level, in my understanding, are science and art. So living at the human level, it means also to be part of these two adventures. And the third word, maybe the most important one, is memory. And I think very often people do not realize that without memory, we are nothing and we have nothing. Without memory, we are immersed in the Heraclitean flow. Without memory, we don't have things we are able to share. We don't have places we know, we remember of. There are a lot of places which are meaningful for you. Even Novosviat is meaningful for me, and I've been through a lot of times, and I know that there are some coffee shops which were already the same during communism. I know things about Novosviat. It's part of memory. Well, in my book, my examples are taken in Paris, forgive me. So this memory, it gives us places, it gives us texts. We could not speak of texts that we all have read without memory. Referring to texts is a part of memory. We have thoughts. How could I disagree with Hegelian dialectic without memory? And I want to be able to disagree with Hegelian dialectic. So Jewish person has a past from which it receives a mission. This importance of memory comes immediately for Jewish experience, because every Jewish person thinks it's still part of something which has been decided kind of 4,000 years ago, and it's a mission even for her or him. This Jewish person, she or he takes this mission coming from the far past as meaningful for her or he. So this is my last word.
Thank you, Professor Salanskis, for this very illuminating and inspiring talk. I think we have time for 2 questions, then we have a break, so we can continue a discussion during the break. Professor Stanisław Krajewski was first, I guess.
So first of all, thank you very much. I think it was a great presentation. I generally agree with your main points, but let me say what the problem is for me. Because your main point, terminologically speaking, was that it's not religion. Judaism is not religion. Of course, talking about just about the terminology doesn't make much sense, but let me point out that there are some aspects that are certainly and should be seen as religious in a broader sense at least. So to make it specific, we do refer to the Torah, to the first books of the Old Testament as special, as the source, as I would say the axioms of everything that is developed later in by the rabbinic thought and those laws and everything that you spoke about. So the fact that this is somehow recognized as a special and unique text is normally expressed as the reference to the revelation, that is a revealed text. And then we have something which to me is a religious term. And I don't think we can really substitute it with anything else. You mentioned the Bund party at the very beginning. So the point is, what was the study observance for the Bundists? Certainly it was not this. If anything, it was perhaps Marx. But anyway, the core, I agree, the core is study observance based on that source, which is the Torah, which means that it is revelation, which means that there is no way to talk about the Torah and its contents and its message without talking about God. At the same time, I agree with you that it's not the concept of God as is normally understood by theologians. I would even say that the question whether God exists or not is not the right question from the Jewish perspective. It's almost irrelevant. There is no good answer to it. Yes is a bad answer, and no is also a bad answer. But the fact is that we need to use this term, the names of God and all those things that are described as being done by, having been done by God. Otherwise, there is no way to refer to keep that memory alive. So the religion, it's maybe a bit too strong, I guess, to say that this is not religion, although I agree with your main message.
Thank you very much, Staszek, for the question. And I think it's a really difficult point and an important point at the same time. And for sure, I agree with you as well as you agree with me, in a way. Because, you know, for starters, there are a lot of Jewish people who live Judaism as a religion. It's the first point. And in France, for example, Judaism has very much evolved as trying to be similar to Christianity. So they have tried to make a synagogue exactly symmetric from church, and even they have created, I don't know how to say it in English, sermon, which is similar to what happens in Catholic churches. So it's the first level of the issue, which is important. And the second important point is that there is this language. If you look at Jewish tradition, you find, in some part of Jewish tradition at least, you find the word God at every corner. For example, if you look at Hasidic writings, you find God everywhere. And sometimes you find, or even developments concerning the relation of the Jewish guy and God. And these descriptions are very near to Christian descriptions. So what I say could seem completely crazy. But then there is also what you say, what you just said, which is that explicit considerations about God in Jewish tradition are usually completely different from theological ones. For example, you said that the question about existence of God is not the right one. And even Gaon of Vilna said that to say that God exists doesn't match. Existence and God do not match together. So, and you have Martin Buber, who said that for Jewish people, the question of the existence of God is not a theoretical question, but a practical question. It means that we have to do something in history. That's how we understand the issue. And you have also Léon Ashkenazi, called Manitou in France, who was one of the famous Jewish figures of the after Second World. And he said, we should never accept to discuss about God independently of the discussions of the rabbis. He thought that the issue of God took sense in the context of the discussions of the rabbis, but not in an external way. So if you put all things of that kind together, I think you understand that how the word God works in Jewish tradition, it's much more like as meaning transcendence, as I said it in my talk, than as the term of theology. So maybe we could agree in that way. Well, it will be enough for today as an answer.
If I am correct, the second question was from Dr. Pinsent.
Thank you for your wonderful and very rich talk. I really enjoyed that. Albert Einstein once commented that there was nothing special about the Jewish people, but of course that's almost a self-refuting statement, because Albert Einstein, like so many other Jews, have been extraordinarily creative. I think 168 Nobel Prizes in science and medicine. And I was in Israel a few days ago, and I saw again the great creativity, amazing concentration of creativity in one place. Would you like to comment about this? Because in my country, even atheists like Richard Dawkins are puzzled by the Jewish people. Why are they so creative? So maybe you have some views about this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a dangerous question because I think we should keep with the idea that Jewish people have nothing special, because we have bad experience with people thinking we are special. So that's first part of the answer. But second part, you know, that I was very amused recently by a news I read, which was about South Korean people, and they decided to teach the Talmud to very young people because of what you said. They saw that at the end of the game it produced Nobel Prizes, so we should teach Talmud to our children. So I think it's funny, but it's a kind of answer, you know, because I think very often people do not realize how it opens paths, possibilities to have to obey laws and rules. And this is a very simple idea. If you are playing in a field where not everything is possible, you are going to find your way to what you have in mind. And so you have the same observation in the epistemologist, very famous Thomas Kuhn. You know, in one of his books, there is a paper where he wonders about how physicists could accept so many revolutions during 20th century. So he had Einstein in mind, but not only Einstein, also quantum mechanics and things of that kind. And he said it's because when we are studying physics in the beginning, we learn a lot of routines, we learn a lot of typical exercises, and we learn how to resolve them. So we have in our bag a lot of solutions, well-prepared solutions. So we understand that then we have to build something with all these tools. So it's the idea that when you have a very scholastic education, you become a great creator, maybe. In the best case.
Okay, as I suggested 10 minutes ago, we have a time only for 2 questions. We had a time only for 2 questions. So I think now we should limit our break to 15 minutes. So let's meet in 15 minutes in the same room. Now we invite for a coffee break, and this is a good opportunity to continue the discussion with Professor Salanskis. Professor Salanskis, thank you very much again.